strain. Was it a bicycle? What is wrong with my brain? Is it the end of me? No, I must still believe. So I'm still in love, you see. Heck yeah, now I'm on my way. But let's stay focused, there's still a job in hand that we must do. Cameras start to click, we know what create is something new. So go Marty and Sarah and Mark and Matt, Owen, Smitty, McGrinny and Jamie Lane in the Archer County Band. The Archer County Band. The Archer County Band. The Archer County Band. Stop the clock, we're done, we're rolling. Sound the horn and sing that we are going. 27 hours, that is the time. So let's hop on the bus and let it shine. Shine, 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 shine. Say sha la 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 la, 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 sha la 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 la. Good morning, folks. You are very welcome to Bandido Talks. And you know, the Bandido today, folks, he has a confession to make. You know, you are going to be privy to a confession from the Bandido. You know, what has happened, folks? You know, I'm going to tell you a story. A story from, you know, the last few days. And I think we're going to learn something from this story. You know, this episode is called Emergency Education. Why emergency education? Well, you see, let me get into the story. It'll all make sense, folks. It'll be a good show. But you're going to figure out an interesting thing that has happened to the Bandido in the last few days. Let me start from last Friday. What happened last Friday, folks? Well, the Bandido came on to YouTube and did a big long show, 3 hours and 7 minutes, all on self-education. So he did this big long show trying to help some of the lost souls out there get their self-education journey started. No problem. It was an excellent show, folks. A really good show. 3 hours and 7 minutes, a wee bit long. You know, the Bandido indulged himself just before the weekend. That is true. But it was a good show. Now, what happened? The Bandido finished his live show on Friday. Very content, very happy with the live show. And then it got to Sunday evening. Now, what does the Bandido sometimes do on a Sunday? Well, you know, he'll sit down and he'll do a little bit of editing. So he'll take his live shows that he's done throughout the week and he'll snip a few little clips from the live shows. A few YouTube shorts, a few Rumble shorts. You know, maybe a 20 or 30 minute segment from the show on a particular topic that we touch on. So I did that on Sunday. I took out a few, you know, little clips from the show. I had this excellent sort of 30-minute clip talking all about why it's really important to look after number one and be selfish. One of my favourite topics in this world, folks, to talk about. And so I clipped out this little part of the show. All good. No problem so far. It all sounds like it's going to plan, folks. So by the time I go to bed on Sunday evening, I've got this really good 3-hour, 7-minute live show from Friday, and I've clipped out a really good segment on being selfish and looking after number one. Nothing to complain about. Life's great. Then we get to yesterday evening, Monday, the 6th of July. Now, this is where it starts to get messy, folks. And the Bandido has a confession to make. What happened yesterday evening? Well, you see, look, the Bandido had finished his food for the evening. He had a very nice dinner. And he was coming upstairs at around 7:30 in the evening to do a little bit of work, let's say. A little bit of work on the laptop. Now, what happened? After finishing my dinner, I poured myself a nice cold glass of apple juice. The Bandido loves some apple juice, especially nice cold apple juice. So I pour myself this little glass of apple juice and I take out my phone and I go on to YouTube and I put on some Ennio Morricone. Now, for those of you who do not know who Ennio Morricone is, he's the dude who does the soundtrack for The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. You know that movie with Clint Eastwood, Blondie and Tuco? It's a very famous movie. And Ennio Morricone has done many of these soundtracks to Western movies. Okay, so here I am. I've got the dinner in the stomach, happy man. You know, you get a few endorphins released when you have a good meal. So I'm feeling happy. I've got my glass of apple juice, even happier. And I'm listening to Ennio Morricone. Now, for those of you who have listened to his soundtrack of The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, you know the way it goes. You know, it's one of those soundtracks that I will listen to when I'm getting ready to take action for something. It really gets me going. You know, you listen to a bit of The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, a bit of Ennio Morricone. It just gets me in a headspace of productivity. It makes me want to take action. So I'm in the zone, you could say. So I've got my apple juice in one hand. I've got my phone in the other hand, listening to Ennio Morricone. Stomach full of food, heading upstairs to do some more work. So I set my apple juice down, and I set the phone down, and I get to my little office space, and I get behind the desk, open up my laptop, and the music is playing. And it's getting really triumphant. You know the way whenever you listen to some of that music from The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, it gets really triumphant at times. And so here I am, you know, getting ready to do this bit of work that I have to do on the laptop. And I've got my apple juice over here. And just before I start to do what it is that I was going to do on the laptop, I remembered, I thought to myself, that's right. The live show from Friday, you know, the big long live show on self-education, 3 hours and 7 minutes. I remembered that, I put that into the wrong playlist, which I actually did do. I put it into the wrong playlist by accident at the time of the show. So I remember that I need to swap the live show from Friday from one playlist into another. So just as I'm about to sit down and do my work, I thought, I'll just do this little swap first. So I go on to YouTube Studio, and the music's going on in the background. And I finish what I'm doing on YouTube Studio. Or so I believe. And so, the music's still going. I log out of YouTube Studio, and then I go on and do the work that I was going to do. I spend about an hour doing it. Now, I finish my apple juice. The soundtrack finishes. It's probably going for about 1 hour or so. I was using that basically as a timer for my work. So once the soundtrack finishes, that's time to stop. So it's about 9:15 yesterday evening. And I knew that I had a video scheduled to come on to YouTube and Rumble at around, 7 o'clock or something like that? It was a Bandido Swings episode. And so I thought, I'll go on to YouTube here and just make sure that the upload has went onto the channel as it should. That's what I always do. So anytime I've got an upload scheduled, a video scheduled, I'll just go on and make sure that everything has uploaded as it should. So I go on to my YouTube channel just to check that the Bandido Swings episode 5, I would encourage you to check it out, folks. Quick little plug. It was a good show. And I go down my channel and I check, and of course it is uploaded, no problem. Then I go back up to the top of the channel. Now, for those of you who have seen the Bandido Talks channel, the first segment that you see are the recent live shows. That's the first tab. That's the tab that I have at the top of the homepage. It's all the most recent live shows. So I'm looking at the tab and I'm going, episode 76. When I was talking about men holding their chick's hand. And I thought, where's episode 77? Where's my big 3 hour, 7 minute live show? So I refreshed the page because I thought, it's probably just a little glitch. So I refreshed the page and it still shows episode 76. There's no episode 77. So I think, has to be a glitch here. So I go out of YouTube and I restart my phone because I thought, look, there's probably something funny happening with the phone. I restart the phone, and when everything comes back on again, I go back onto YouTube Studio. And then actually not YouTube Studio, onto my YouTube channel first. And I look and it's still not there. Where's episode 77? So then I go on to YouTube Studio. Where's my episode? Where's my live show? It's not on there either. So I'm momentarily confused. Has my live show been taken down? What happened? And then it dawned on me. And you know, whenever you have that sinking feeling, folks, you know the way when something happens and you're initially confused, you're thinking, this doesn't make any sense. What's going on here? And your brain is trying to search for answers because I had a live show that was there a few hours ago, now it's not. And so I'm a little confused, thinking, it doesn't look like it's a glitch, so where's the show went to? Has it been taken down? Was there there couldn't have been a copyright infringement. I mean, I use my own original music on the introduction, so that can't be a problem. Did I say something in the show that was not approved by YouTube, so I went back into YouTube Studio again. I wanted to check and see, have I been flagged for something? Have I got a strike or anything like that? No strike, no red flags. And then the sinking feeling, folks. You know that sinking feeling that you have? You hope you're not right about what it is that you're thinking. But it starts to grow internally. And I sit back and say, surely not. Surely I haven't done what I think I've done. Now, what did I say to you earlier? Before I actually came up the stairs yesterday evening, I had finished my dinner. I had a great dinner. It was marvellous. The little endorphin release from the food. I was carrying my apple juice. I love a good glass of cold apple juice. And I was listening to Ennio Morricone, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. And I was feeling extremely triumphant and euphoric as I was climbing up the stairs. And then what happened? Before I went to do my work on the laptop, remember what I said? I said, oh, my live show is in the wrong playlist. I need to swap it over. Then I had this realization. Did I actually go into the playlists? And did I delete the episode from the playlist, or did I delete it from the live streaming tab section? That was the question that I was starting to ask myself. Did I actually go into the playlists and remove it, or did I go to the live streaming section on YouTube Studio and delete it there? Now, what's the problem? If I did in fact go to the live streaming section on YouTube Studio, if I deleted it there, what happens? It's deleted for all of eternity. Of course, having retraced my steps, what do you think the Bandido did? That's right. He went into, not the playlist, he went into the YouTube live streaming section on YouTube Studio, and like a dipshit, he deleted the entire live stream. And better still, he didn't even realize he did it at the time. He only realized subsequently what he had done. Now, this is what has prompted the emergency education episode this morning on a Tuesday morning. Because once I realized I had done this last night, I thought, fuck, I've lost the entire live show. The 3 hours and 7 minutes down the toilet. Well, we can't be having that. That was my first thought. I thought, I can't be having that. That was meant to be episode 77 because it was supposed to tie in with an episode that I did over on Rumble. So I thought, I'm going to have to do a live show today. And it's going to have to be called Emergency Education because I don't have 3 hours today to do a live show. I have to get my arse out of here at about 11:30 or so. So, emergency education this morning. And before we get into emergency education, what is the lesson, folks? Because there's a big lesson to be learned from the Bandido. The Bandido's confession, of course, is that he deleted, by accident, his live show last Friday. The 3 hour, 7 minute live show on self-education. That's the confession. If you go back onto the channel, you'll see there is no self-education 3 hour, 7 minute long live show from last Friday. Now here's the question, folks. When you lose in life, when you fuck up, when you make a mistake, what should you do? Because this is an inevitability, folks, in life. I made a mistake last night. I deleted the live stream. I thought I was deleting it from a playlist, but in reality, I was deleting it from the YouTube live stream section. Now, when you lose in life, folks, we have a great saying that we always talk about here on the channel. When you lose, don't lose the lesson. It's a great quote from the UCLA basketball coach. He's no longer living, John Wooden. John Wooden used to coach basketball in California. He was a basketball, college, high school, or whatever it was, basketball coach. And he always said, when you lose in life, don't lose the lesson. So what did I lose last night? I lost a very informative, educational live show that I was very happy with. But there's nothing I can do. It's now down the toilet. It's been flushed away. I can't retrieve it. So, don't lose the lesson. And what's the lesson, folks, in this? Well, you see, on the show, what does the Bandido talk about here on the show all the time? He talks about the importance of not being distracted and not living on autopilot. Two very important things. When we are distracted, folks, our attention gets brought from here over here. And when we are on autopilot, we're not really consciously engaging with the present. These are a problem. These two things can be an enormous problem if they happen at once. Now, last night, there was a chink in the Bandido's armor. He had just finished his food. He had a glass of apple juice. He was listening to one of his favourite soundtracks, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, by Ennio Morricone. So as I was coming up the stairs, what was I? What sort of a state was I in? Well, you could easily make the case that I was in a slightly distracted state as I went on to my laptop. Because I was listening to all this music. I have my apple juice. And so I changed my plan. I decide that I'm going to take the live show off this playlist, move it into another one. But the music's going in the background. And I'm sort of paying attention to what I'm doing, but I'm kind of listening to the music because I really like the music. And as I'm sort of typing on the keyboard, I can feel, that I'm moving with the music. In other words, am I fully focused on the task in hand? What was the task in hand? The task in hand was take Friday's live show from this playlist and put it into a different playlist. That was the task in hand. But was I fully focused on the task in hand? No. I was distracted partially by the music. And so what happened? In this distracted state, I fell into autopilot. So when I went on to YouTube Studio and I'm whizzing the little mouse around, I've got the little arrow and it's whizzing around and I'm typing and I'm opening things up and closing things down. Because I am sort of distracted by the music, I allow myself to drift into autopilot. And what happened? Boom! Live show deleted. And you know what the really interesting thing is? I didn't even know I had done it. I closed down YouTube Studio and I was sure that what I had done was simply move the show from one playlist to the other. I was sure that that is what I had done. If you had come into my little office studio and said, Mr. Bandido, you've just deleted your live stream, I would have said to you, nonsense. I have not. I've just moved it from one playlist to the other. It was only looking back an hour or so later, whenever I went to check a different video that had been uploaded, did I realize this is missing. Why is it missing? And so, what happened? I deleted the live stream. Okay, I've lost some valuable content that I was happy with. Okay, can I retrieve the content? No, it's gone. So when you lose in life, folks, don't lose the lesson. What's the lesson? The lesson is, when you are distracted, Being in a distracted state can sometimes lead to you or I falling into an autopilot state. Because when you're sort of distracted over here, but you're trying to do something here, and you're sort of focusing on the thing over here, and you're sort of half focused, half not on the task in hand, what happens? Well, autopilot kicks in. Your previous understanding of how YouTube works, of how YouTube Studio works, of how to navigate this terrain, you fall into autopilot. And you sort of let your unconscious brain kind of start to dictate your motor movements. And this is what happened to me yesterday evening. Because I'm listening to this really good music that I enjoy, I'm not fully in the task. I got complacent, fell into autopilot, and paid the price. So folks, what is the lesson here? Well, this may be a small example, a basic example. You know, it's not the end of the world. Okay, is it a little frustrating that I lose a live show that was quite informative? Yes, it was a little frustrating at the time, but it's not the end of the world. There is, though, a very important lesson in it. And normally, folks, I'm a very focused individual. When I go to do something, normally my head's in it. Normally, I know exactly what I'm dedicating that particular portion of time towards. And normally I'll be focused. I'm coming upstairs, I've got 1 hour to do this work. Bang, let's do it. But you see, yesterday, there were a whole bunch of factors came together. A really nice dinner, got my apple juice, listening to Ennio Morricone. I had planned to do something else on the laptop. Then at the last minute, I decided to change this live show from one playlist to the other, but my head's not really in it. I'm sort of distracted by the music. By being distracted by the music, I fall into an autopilot state. My hands are moving, but I'm not really paying attention. Autopilot takes over. I think I'm in the playlist section of YouTube Studio. I'm actually in the live streaming section of YouTube Studio. Boom, boom, boom. Few clicks later, I feel like I've got the job done. Turns out I haven't. Don't lose the lesson. You have to analyze, folks. When you lose in life, when something goes tits up, you need to figure out how it happened to make sure you don't lose the lesson. Now, do you think that this is ever going to happen to me again? No, it is not. This has been engraved in my mind, burned into my mind, because I lost a valuable piece of content. Now, you might say, well, why do you not just come back on and do the show again? Well, you know, folks, I don't really have a script when I speak. You know, I come on here, I have an idea about what I'm going to talk about, but I don't read off a script. I don't do all of this enormous preparation before a live show. I just come on, I have a vague idea of what I'm going to talk about, boom, off we go. So, you know, I'll never be able to replicate that live show. That was a moment in time. It was how I was feeling that particular evening. It came out in that particular way, and I'm not someone who likes to repeat things, really. So I'm not going to sit down and try to rehash that live show. Absolutely not. But it was frustrating because I understood that it was a moment in time. I was in a particular psychological state that evening that allowed me to deliver the information in that way. So, when you lose, folks, don't lose the lesson. I have not lost the lesson. I got a little sloppy last night. Normally I don't do it. Normally, when I'm going to do some work, I'm not playing a whole bunch of music. I'm not distracted with fucking sipping apple juice. I don't normally do these things. It was just yesterday. I was feeling particularly euphoric. Bandido was on cloud 19. And so I indulged a bit of apple juice and a bit of music. That's where we don't want to lose the lesson, because that caused me to lose focus. Why did I lose focus? Because I was distracted. And when I was distracted, my head wasn't fully in the task. because my head was not fully in the task consciously, because I sacrificed some of my consciousness, some of my conscious input into the task, I allowed autopilot to come in and wrestle control of the process. This is why autopilot is extremely problematic, folks. This is why you don't want to live your life on autopilot. Because literally, you could be making one mistake after the other, and just like me, you don't even realize you've made the mistake. Folks, listen to what I'm saying. When I deleted the live stream, I didn't even know I did it. As far as I was concerned, my own brain had told me, task completed. And it was only afterwards when I turned the music off, got rid of the apple juice, and actually got my head in the game and went, whoa, where is this? Did I realize the era of the Bandido's ways? And so, that's why autopilot and being distracted can be such a problem. This is a micro example of why it's a problem. We talk about it in terms of politics and people who use manipulative strategies on us, things that you see in the news. This is why it's important that you don't get distracted by what you're being told, either in mainstream media news or alternative media news. Everyone's got an agenda. We always talk about this. And the last thing you want is to be walking through your life on autopilot, distracted. Because being distracted only gives more power to your autopilot mode. Remember, you're trying to combat autopilot. Autopilot is a natural default, folks. Why? Why is autopilot such a natural default for humans? Because it conserves energy. If you are on autopilot, you're able to conserve more energy in that state because it's more automated. You're not having to invest as much conscious input and thought. If you can automate processes in your life, it saves you more time and energy. And so, we all animals, have a built-in energy conservation mechanism. And so we are always trying to find ways to make our life more efficient. We're always trying to find ways to save energy, to conserve energy. Autopilot is one of the most marvelous ways to conserve energy. And this is why it's dangerous, though. There's a good evolutionary reason why you have an energy conservation mechanism. It goes without saying. If you're living out on the Serengeti, or you're living out in the Kalahari Desert, or you're living out in the Amazon basin, you don't have a lot of margin for error as an ancestral human. You don't have all of these modern day luxuries that modern day civilization provides us with. You have very little margin for error. You are constantly living on the breadline. You're barely getting enough calories each day to maintain an optimal functional state. You don't have houses. You don't have central heating. You don't have fucking cars. You have to walk everywhere. You have to hunt. You have to forage. You have to protect yourself from predators. There are disease-carrying insects all over the place. Infections. Invading tribes. There's a fuck ton of stuff that's happening in your ancestral environment. And so the last thing you want to do is to be misusing your energy in an ancestral environment. If you've already got very little margin for error, and you're basically on the verge of starvation every week, the last thing you want to be doing is misinvesting your energy in places that aren't going to yield significant results. Your DNA is built from ancestors that lived in an environment completely distinct to the modern environment. Your ancestors evolved in an environment of scarcity, not an environment of abundance. We all live in an environment of abundance right now. We can just literally click a few buttons on our phone, get the fucking food delivered to our doorstep. I mean, we could literally, we can order food, whether it's shopping or already cooked food, to our doorstep. We can order things off Amazon, toasters, fucking phone chargers, books, you name it. Life has become exceptionally easy in the modern environment, but it was not easy for your ancestors. Your ancestors didn't have the internet. They didn't have Amazon. They didn't have the globally interconnected network that we have now on Earth. And so, what's the problem? Your ancestors evolved very important energy conservation mechanisms so that they are not wasting or misusing their energy. Because if they were to misuse energy in an ancestral environment, that could be the difference between them living and dying. You have the same DNA as your ancestors. That's why you're here listening to this live show on the other end of the screen. You have the same energy conservation mechanism that's trying to dictate your behavior. And that energy conservation mechanism, if it could have its way, it wants you to fall into autopilot as many times as possible throughout the day, because an autopilot state conserves energy. But that isn't in your best interests. Being in an autopilot state in the modern environment makes you ripe for exploitation. And it also means that you're more prone to making mistakes because you're not present, you're not consciously providing your own input and focus into a process. So, the Bandido last night got a little sloppy. He succumbed to his energy conservation mechanism. He got distracted by the music and he allowed the autopilot, energy conserving state's foot in the door. Its foot got in the door and then it broke the door open and took complete control of this process. And I really wasn't even conscious of what I was doing. I was more interested in the fucking music and my apple juice. And what happens? Mistake. I make a mistake. When you lose, don't lose the lesson. I very much learned my lesson, so I won't make the same mistake again. And that sloppy behavior will be more or less eradicated in those sets of circumstances going forward. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is the Bandido, when we're talking about education, folks, the Bandido, he earned his official qualification for being a dipshit. Last night, folks, I officially qualified PhD in being a dipshit. Because that's what dipshits do. Dipshits walk around on autopilot. Distracted by this. Exploited by someone else. Making a mistake. They step in dog shit. You know, it's just dipshits do this. Dipshits walk around. They are easily distracted. They allow their autopilot, energy conserving state's foot in the door, takes complete control of their own mind. They don't even realize what they're doing half the time. They only retrospectively look back and go, oh, whoops, shouldn't have done that. And better still, true dipshits, true board certified dipshits. You know what they also tend to do? They tend to lose the lesson. At least I haven't lost the lesson. You know, I may have my qualification. I may have my degree now in being a dipshit. But you know, I'm not a board certified one. I don't think so. Because at least I learn the lessons when I lose in life. So folks, there's the story. There's the confession. So if you're going to go back onto the channel and you're going to look for episode 77, how to self-educate yourself, it ain't there. You're going to have to make do with this show. Now, as I've already said, I'm not going to try and rehash that show from last Friday. It was a long show. So we're going to do emergency education today, which means it's going to be quick fire education. We're going to make it snappy. Now, the first thing that I want to talk about, very briefly here, we touched on this on Friday's episode, private and public education. Okay, why is it important to realize the problem with private and public education? Because look, most people acknowledge that free public education comes with strings attached. Folks, There's no such thing as a free lunch. So see, whenever you're sold the notion, free public education, it's not free. It may be free in terms of a financial cost, but it has another cost associated with it that's not financial. Certainly not directly. What's the cost associated with public education? Well, when you're given something for free, you need to ask yourself, public education, who funds public education? That's right, it's the government. So what you are learning in the free public education system is you are learning the government's agenda. You are learning the government's vision of how the world works. That is the string that is attached to public free education. Now, we talk on the show all the time, folks. Everybody, you have an agenda, I have an agenda, everyone has an agenda, every person, every group, every institution has an agenda. There's nothing wrong with having an agenda. An agenda is simply a whole bunch of goals and objectives. That's it. So I have my own individual goals and objectives in this life. So do you. So does the government. Now, when you go to free public education, you are willingly subjecting your children to the government's version of reality. Now, we then need to look at the government's track record for telling the truth. Now, throughout human history, and I don't even just mean in the last 100 years, I just mean throughout human history, you see the people who are in control of a country, in control of a plot of land, in control of some part of earth, city, town, whatever. We call that government. That's the name that we give it. Just government is the broad term that we're going to use. Government's track record throughout human history. Has the government throughout human history been prone to a few porky pies? How clean a track record does the government have throughout human history of telling the truth? In other words, how many times has the government throughout human history omitted the truth, manipulated the truth, or just fabricated a whole bunch of bogus nonsense and told you that it's the truth? I think I'm going to leave that conclusion in your capable hands. Let's just say the government doesn't exactly have, throughout human history, a squeaky clean record of telling the truth and presenting the, quote, raw, unfiltered facts of reality. I think we would agree. Okay, so if we agree that the government's track record for telling the raw, unfiltered facts and truth about this reality is somewhat dubious, then by logical extension, if the public education system, which is free, is teaching you the government's agenda and what the government wants you to think about how the world works, is there a possibility, if we were to speculate, folks, pure speculation, is it possible that some of the things that you learn in the free public education system may not be completely representative of reality? Is it possible that some of the facts that get presented to you through free public education might be manipulated, omitted, perhaps, or completely and utterly fabricated? When we think about the track record of the person who funds, or the institution that funds this public education system, when we think about their track record, is it possible that there might be a little bit of bogus information in there that your kids might be learning? Of course there's a possibility, because the government has its own agenda. It wants you to believe its version of reality. It wants you to adopt its version of reality. It wants to make sure that you're seeing the world in the way that it wants you to see the world, because it has its own agenda. It has its own motivations for doing that. Okay. Now, we understand that this is the string attached to free public education. So when I hear people say to me, oh, isn't it just great? Free education. Everybody gets educated. It's free. There's nothing free in this life. Free public education. Sure, you may not need to pay to subscribe to the school. You may not need to pay fees for public education, but it brings with it an enormous string attached, which is contaminated, polluted, manipulated information that your children are being taught. And again, everyone has an agenda, including me. Here on the channel, I'm giving you the Bandido's version of the facts of reality. That's my version of how I see the world. The government has its version of how it sees the world and wants the world to go. When you go to free public education, you are willingly subjecting your children to the government's agenda. That's the string attached. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying that's what it is. It's not a free lunch, though. Don't think it's a free lunch. It isn't. Now, the reason why I want to talk about this is because one thing that I often hear people say is, yeah, I understand that. Public education, oh, it's a scam. Oh, it's just the government's agenda. That's why I send my kids to private school. What do you say to that, folks? You know, so you've got some people who tell me, or I hear them say, yeah, no, I'm ahead of the curve. I understand. Free public education, it's not free. You know, it's just a bogus version of reality coming from the government. Yes, Mr. Bandido, I understand this. I'm ahead of the curve. One step ahead of everyone else. That's why I send my kids to private school. Okay, folks, private school is simply public school masquerading as something else. They are the same thing. The only difference with private school is that you have to pay to get into it. Now, I know what you're going to say. No, you're wrong, Mr. Bandido. No, the private school doesn't have to work off the public school curriculum. The private schools create their own curriculum, separate from the public school curriculum. You see, it's different. No, it's not. It is not different. All you have to do, folks, is work your way back up the chain. We talked about this recently on our global warming episode that we did a mind stream on. Work your way back up the chain. Okay, so you've got a private school. Very nice. And fuck knows how much you're going to have to pay in fees for that. Now, you're saying, oh, but they get to create their own curriculum. In other words, what you're basically saying is they are independent of the system. That's what people are trying to tell me. People are trying to tell me that the private school to which they have sent their children works independently of the education system. Folks, please, let's work our way back up the chain. In order for a private school to be established here in the West, who does the private school need to send their curriculum to so that it can be, quote, verified as meeting the necessary baseline educational standards of this country? Do you think that a private school works completely independently, whereby they are just allowed to openly, freely create their own curriculum without any form of moderation, without any form of oversight from some other educational body? Jesus Christ, folks, come on. If you want to start a private school with your own distinct curriculum, that curriculum needs to get passed by the education authority. In other words, it needs to pass through the filter of government. And guess what? You see, if your curriculum in your private school doesn't meet the necessary baseline for standard appropriate educational practices, you know what happens? Your educational school, private school, it gets closed. It gets closed because it's now providing education that doesn't meet the standards set by who? The government. Folks, a private school is nothing other than a public school masquerading as something that it isn't. It's literally a public school that's been called private in order to get the conscientious, ahead of the curve parents who think they are outsmarting the system to pay a fuck ton of money to send their kid to school. So instead of just sending their kid to school for free, they now have to pay for it. And no, the curriculum isn't unique. You aren't going to learn anything outstandingly new about the world when you go to private school. Their curriculum needs to be moderated by the educational authorities that work on behalf of the government. So if your curriculum in a private school doesn't meet the baseline necessary requirements for an appropriate educational, facility, if it doesn't meet the baseline necessary requirements that the government determines to be, acceptable, then guess what? Your curriculum gets rejected. And if you don't, let's say, if you don't moderate your own curriculum, if you don't adjust your own curriculum, you know what happens, your private school? It gets shut down. It gets shut down. And it gets shut down because you do not have full autonomy and independence over what you teach the students. You will be shut down. So, private schools, they have a board of governors, which is supposed to be this, the board of governors is supposed to be this, group of people independent from the government, former teachers, parents, educational people. That's who you answer to, the board of governors. If you're a private school, you answer to the board of governors. Do you really? Because it's funny, folks. Your curriculum. You know where the buck stops with your curriculum? The same person, the same institution that's involved in free public education. In other words, this is exactly the same as public and private healthcare. They're the same thing. Private healthcare and private education are basically ways to capture, to trap conscientious, smart, forward-thinking parents who think they are making a difference to their children when in reality they've just walked into a different trap. The education is no different. Now, you may want your kid to go to a private school because the environment is nicer, because the classes are smaller. Okay, those are perfectly legitimate reasons to send your kid to a private school. If you think your kid's going to benefit from, smaller classroom sizes, from greater access to teachers, etc., no problem. Then that might be a fine reason to send your kid to a private school. Because, maybe you don't want your kid associating with the riffraff who are in public education. All the kids, those problematic kids, the bullies in the public education system, in the schools, the public schools. Fuck knows who's going to come into a public school. All shapes and sizes. So maybe you might want to send your little delicate Johnny and Julie to private school because, they're more enclosed. They're in a more protected, enclosed environment, away from the riffraff and the masses. Okay, those are all legitimate reasons, if you want to use your money to protect your little Johnny and Julie, have them in smaller classes, have greater access to teachers, a more tailored educational program, away from the masses, no problem. But if you think that your little Johnny or Julie is getting a superior education to the riffraff in the public school system, no, they are not. The curriculum is the same. And I know you're going to be sold on the notion, no, the curriculum isn't the same. No, the private schools create their own curriculum. The public schools, that's just government propaganda. The public school system, the government's just, trying to infiltrate and infect the minds of the young people. But the private schools, no, they create their own independent curriculum that functions independently from the government's public educational system. Yeah, you're in a trap. This is exactly the same as private healthcare. The only useful thing about private healthcare is that it's faster. That's it. Public healthcare, you have to wait. You're on a waiting list to get your surgery. You're on a waiting list to get your treatment. Okay, so public health. If you're involved in public health, you're going to have to wait a fuck ton of time before you get what you want. If you go private in the healthcare system, yeah, you get things quicker. The treatments are the same. You get the same treatment quicker. You're not getting a better treatment. You're getting the same treatment. It's no different. And I can speak from personal experience on this, by the way. For those of you who have been following the channel, my own father died earlier this year in January, 7 months ago. He went into the public healthcare system. He went into the private healthcare system. I was with him for every treatment, for every consultation, for every scan. And guess what? It's exactly the same. The treatments and the equipment and the advice is exactly the same. The only difference was when my father went private, he got access to the same things quicker. That was it. It is exactly the same with public and private education. You aren't getting taught a unique curriculum at a private school. That's not how it works. The curriculum is the same. You are sold the narrative by the private school that the curriculum is different. Oh, I wonder why you would be sold that narrative. So that you'll pay. That's the reason why you're told. One of the big selling points of private schools is, oh, don't worry, your child won't be subjected to that old public school curriculum. No, we don't do that here. We have our own curriculum that's going to teach your child something distinctly different. And your child is going to become one of the elites of society if you go to our private school. Bollocks. It's the same curriculum. It's the same stuff. You're going to learn the same stuff. The only difference is you're going to have smaller classroom sizes. You're going to have less riffraff around you. You're going to have more access to the teachers. It's going to be a more tailored educational experience. That's true. And your kid might be able to focus a wee bit more. And who knows, your kid might enjoy their school experience a little bit more because they don't have all the riffraff around them calling them names and bullying them. Right. So you might have a more pleasant experience. Your kid might have a more pleasant experience. They ain't learning anything new though. And if you honestly think that the government is going to allow a private school to teach something that contradicts their agenda, then you're a dipshit. You really are a dipshit. That would be like saying the government, the public healthcare, the public health system is going to allow some private healthcare entity to come in and offer a new innovative cancer treatment. Of course they're not going to be allowed to do that. They're going to be shut down. No. Private education is teaching the same stuff, it's just a different environment. That's it. And of course, the private schools are going to sell you on their curriculum. The whole point, remember, there are certain parents in the population who are smart, they are conscientious, they really care about their kids, they want to be ahead of the curve, they don't want to go into the public education system. So there are certain parents who are certainly very conscientious and wealthy. They're middle class, they have some money to blow. So you've got wealthy, conscientious, smart parents who don't want to use the public education sector. Right, well, so what's the logical thing to do? Yeah, set up this thing called private education, private schools. Set this up, sell it to these parents like it's going to cause their Johnny and Julie to become the next Einstein because they're learning from a different curriculum. Sell them that bogus nonsense, and then you know what you're going to do? You're going to extract. You're going to force them into a situation where they can't refuse but to part with their money to fund their kids' private education. In other words, it's a scam, is what I'm saying. You're not learning anything any different. Your kid isn't going to be any more educated if they go to private school than if they go to public school. All you're going to do is potentially make their existence a little more enjoyable. That's it. Because, folks, if you think the government is going to willingly allow a private education competitor to just sprout up and start teaching stuff that contradicts the government's agenda, if you think that is how the world works, you truly are a dipshit. You're a board-certified dipshit, I'm afraid. Because who has the ultimate final say on any curriculum? The government. It has to go through the government. And if it doesn't meet the government's, necessary standards for what it qualifies as being a appropriate education, then you know what? The curriculum doesn't get rolled out. And that's the scam of private schools. Private schools teach the same shit. They just package what it is that they are offering you in a certain way to sell you on the notion that their curriculum is unique. And then once you're sold on the notion, that the curriculum is unique, you then part with what? What do you part with? Money! You pay your fees now. So instead of just sending your kid to public education for free, you now pay for your kid to go to private education to get the exact same education. But now you're paying a fuck ton of money. Private education has been set up so as to take money from the middle class, from the conscientious, smart, well-to-do middle class. That's what private education is there to do. It's there to capture those people as well. Most people are average income, and so they send their kids to public school. Most people can't afford the fees of private schools. So most people send their kids to public schools. Great. So they're going to get the government's agenda through public school education. Great. But what happens when you've got more wealthy, smarter, more conscientious parents who can afford? They have more money to splash around. Yeah, you create this thing called private schools. And when you create a private school and you sell the parent on the notion that the curriculum is different and that Johnny and Julie, their little Johnny and Julie, are going to become superstars if they go to this school, what do these wealthy, conscientious, smart parents do? They part with their moolah and they pay the fees because they're under the illusion that their kids are getting a superior education when they are being literally taught the same things. They are being taught the same things in a more pleasant environment. All right. So, most people, folks, why am I saying this? Now, that's public and private schools, actually. Let's just touch briefly on universities. Fuck me. Universities, again, it's the same thing. Universities, they have a monopoly. There's a complete monopoly. Nobody's allowed to set up a similar institution to a university that would be allowed to fairly compete. Why? Well, it's the same thing again. Just think of universities like fucking schools. Who funds the universities? The government. So again, do you think the universities that are funded by the government, their paymasters are the government, do you think the universities are going to teach stuff to their students, to the up and coming young people of the world, that are going to contradict? Do you think the things they are going to teach are going to contradict their paymaster's agenda? Their paymaster being the government? Of course not. And of course, is anybody just allowed in the free open marketplace to go and establish their own university? No. In order to establish a university, you need to meet whose criteria? That's right, the government's criteria. So if you or I thought, you know what, I don't like the public school system, I don't like the private school system, I don't like the university system, I want to start my own university. Well, you know what I would have to do? I would have to go through a fuck ton of red tape. I'd have to pay a shit ton of money, and then you see, by the time I've fucking made my way through the swamp of red tape, and I'm almost broke trying to fund this thing, you know what the government will then say to me? Oh, by the way, yes, you need to meet these educational standards, by the way. Oh yeah, you're not allowed to teach this, this, and this. No, you're not allowed that in your university curriculum. You're not allowed to offer a degree on that particular subject. No. If you do that, we're going to shut your university down. Monopoly. The university system, it's a monopoly. And you know what the great laugh is about university? You go through school doing all this studying, doing all these worthless examinations, so that you have to pay the university. I mean, folks, it is fucking bananas in pajamas. Truly bananas in pajamas. You do all the work. You do all the work at school, and then you pay the university and get into debt. It's madness. The system is absolutely madness. I can't believe I was such a fucking idiot to pass through it. It goes to show you how much of my life when I was younger that I was living on autopilot. I went through fucking GCSEs, A-levels, and university education like a retard. Like I was a retard when I was younger. Complete and utter dipshit. I passed through the whole thing like an idiot. And then it was only afterwards that I realized, why did I do this? What have I got to show? I've got a few pieces of paper with some numbers and letters on them. I can't do anything, and I'm in debt. I had to pay the university. You know, wouldn't logic tell you, folks? Isn't this what logically should happen? Shouldn't the university be recruiting the up-and-coming talent? Shouldn't the university be incentivizing the up-and-coming young talent to go to their university? Shouldn't the university be paying young people to employ them at their institution? No, that's not the way it works. You pay the university. Like, imagine, folks, you went in for a job interview and you sat down for your interview, and the people on the other side of the table said, yeah, we'd really love you to come in and work in our company. And you said, great, okay, when can I get started? And the fucking suits on the other side of the table say to you, yeah, you just have to pay us 20 grand. Yeah, you pay us 20 grand to work in our company. Excuse me? Yeah, Patsy, for you to work in our company, you have to pay 20 grand to us, because we're going to, allow you to work in our company, and you're going to learn all about our company. And then Patsy says, but you're not going to pay me, so I'm going to pay you to work in your company so that I can get experience. But sure, I could just get experience somewhere else where I don't have to pay. Yeah, I understand that, Patsy, but that's just the way we roll here. Imagine that is how the workplace worked, folks. Nobody would be employing anyone. You wouldn't. Why would you go to a company, pay them £20,000 so that you can gain experience in their company. That's retarded. But you see, this is what happens when you have a monopoly over the educational system. What do I mean by monopoly? There is no competition for the universities. The paymaster, in this case the government, doesn't allow a free, open, competitive marketplace. Because you see, if the educational system was truly free and open, and people were allowed to start their own school without a whole bunch of red tape and legislation and educational criteria to meet, you see, if people were allowed to just establish their own universities, guess what would happen? The current educational institutions, the public schools, the private schools, and the fucking universities, they would be subjected to free and fair competitive processes. And what do you think would happen? They would get out-competed. People would choose the educational facility that actually incentivizes them to come and perhaps pays them to actually become a part of the facility. Do you think if there was free open competition, say for universities here, this is what we're talking about. Universities, they have a complete monopoly. If they were subjected to competition elsewhere, and there were different incentives being provided by these other educational institutions, people would have options. They could choose to either continue and pay the university to get into debt, or they could choose this other educational institution whereby you don't have to get into debt. No. In fact, this other educational institution will actually pay you to come and work for them because they want the brightest, most talented, up-and-coming people to work in their institution. Because if they can get the young, talented, smart people to work in their institution, that's going to make their institution better. Does that happen? No, of course it doesn't. And it's the same thing with schools as well. It should be a free, open, competitive marketplace. You should be allowed to establish, it goes without saying, folks, you should be allowed to establish your own educational facility. Of course you should. It's competition. It's the same with any business. Just think of it like a business. Should you get free education? Well, if that's what you want to provide, you should be allowed to put it out there into the marketplace. Okay, here's your free education. And here's what I provide for your free education. Allow the market to dictate who is the best option on the table. Why not do that? But we couldn't have that because that would mean there would be competition and people would naturally be sending their kids to the educational institutions that are going to yield the greatest results. But if you don't have any other options, if all competition has been eliminated because there's a monopoly, then you've no option but to go to a public school or a private school or university. Those are your three options. The only other option that remains is the parents to privately educate their children. That's it. And that is, you could say, that is the best option of the lot. If you want full control over your kids' education, now look, you're still going to get visited by the authorities. You can't avoid that. They're still going to be stretching their little tentacles and keeping an eye on you. But if we're talking about the most ideal set of circumstances here for education, it would be the parents privately educating their own kids. Homeschooling, in other words. That's the best thing to do. That's the most control that a parent can have over their kids' education. Because, whether you like it or not, folks, the educational marketplace is not free and open and competitive. You are forced, if you want to go out into the open marketplace, you only really have three options. You have a public school, a private school, or a university, or some sort of regional college. Like, that's all you have. There aren't going to be a whole bunch of other educational facilities that are competing with these to keep them in check. This is the problem with a monopoly, folks. When you have a monopoly, you can get away with a whole bunch of shit because people don't have any other option. The only option that really exists is homeschooling. Now, how many people are able to homeschool their kids? In order to homeschool your kids, you as a parent would need to be in a position of power in life. You would need to have time to be able to do that. And in order to have time to be able to do that, you would need to be in a financial position of power. You would need to have your finances set up in a way so that you can take time away from working to educate your kids. How many people can do that? Barely any people can do that. There's only a very select few people who are going to be able to homeschool their kids. So anyway, that's public schools, private schools, and universities. Again, the universities, you're not allowed to start a university. So if nobody can start a university in order to compete with the pre-existing government-funded universities, then there's no competition, which means the only option, if someone wants to go to university, the only option is to go through the current system, which is fucking bananas in pajamas because you are the one putting in all the work. You're the one who's doing all the studying, doing all the examinations. You're the one who's went through school to get all your grades, and that's not enough, of course. Oh no. No, you're going to have to get into debt now and pay a fuck ton to come to our educational institution so that we can inject more of the government's agenda into your brain. Only now you have to pay for it. So anyway, why am I saying all this? I'm saying this because not most people, some people have come to the conclusion that all forms of education are to varying degrees compromised. The system is compromised. It's not telling you the raw, unfiltered facts of reality. And if you don't have the raw, unfiltered facts of reality, that means you're going to have varying degrees of distortion in your worldview. When you have distortion in your worldview, you have inaccuracies about how the world works. And when you have inaccuracies about how the world works, you make mistakes. So, there are many people who are now coming to this conclusion where it's like, yeah, the system, the public education system is, or the private, even the private schools as we've talked about, whether it's public education, private schools or universities, a lot of people are now looking at these things and saying, no, this is redundant, this is outdated. They teach outdated information and the information clearly has a biased slant to it. In other words, it's clearly we could say the motives behind the curriculum are now becoming more apparent because we can now work our way back up the chain. Who is funding all of this? With whom does the buck stop? The government. So if the buck stops with the government, who is actually directing? Who is telling all of these educational facilities what to do? The government, which means no matter where you go, public school, private school, or university, or regional college, you're being injected with the government's agenda. There are some people that have no problem with this. There are other people that do have a problem with this. Because some people are looking at the government's track record throughout human natural history, and some people are coming to the conclusion, well, we have evidence, we've got ever so slightly, a little bit of evidence here that the government in the past has told some porky pies, so we would therefore have reason to believe, we would have at least reason to speculate, that some of the education that our kids have learned may also be injected full of this similar porky pie bogus nonsense. So people are naturally now starting to say, well, if I can't trust the public schools, the private schools, the universities and the regional colleges, then who do I trust? How do I educate myself? How do I try to clear out some of the bogus distortion that has been injected into my brain through the monopoly, basically? Well, this is why we call this emergency education, folks. Let's get straight into this. This is going to be quick, because we're at 1 hour and 22 minutes, and I need to get my hole out of here pretty soon. So, let's get our little screen up here. What we're going to do is, we're going to talk very briefly about these 4 key educational categories. We talked about these on Friday's live stream, which is now down the toilet. So what we're going to do is, we're going to get ourselves off and going here. We're going to just give a few little points of direction here. So for someone who's on the other end of the show here, who doesn't know how to educate themselves, and they need a crash course in education, they need to figure out, how do I get started? What are some of the basics? Okay, well, a crash course in emergency education, from the Bandido's perspective, falls into 4 educational categories. What are these 4 educational categories? You need to educate yourself on your physical health, number 1. Number 2, your financial health. Number 3, human psychology, in other words, how your own mind works as a human. And number 4, you need to educate yourself on how to look after number 1, first and foremost. Okay, so what we're going to do here is, we're going to break down super quickly, crash course, we're going to fly through this. These are 4 educational topics that are not well dealt with in conventional education. How many people leave school and university truly understanding how to cure for their physical health? Not very many people. We don't get taught about it at school in any significant way, and when you go to university, you don't get taught about it in the correct way there either. Number 2, financial health. How much time at school do you learn about money and finances and how the financial system works? And when you do go to university, you get taught a whole bunch of bogus nonsense about how economics works. That's why nobody has a fucking clue what inflation is. That's what I was talking about on the previous show on Friday. So we need to understand how do we care for our financial health? We are never educated on this. We don't get taught about this. You're just basically thrown out into the world and you haven't a fucking clue how the system works. Okay. Number 3, how many people when they leave conventional education actually understand how their own mind works? Folks, if you don't understand how your own mind works, then that means you are more susceptible to manipulative strategies and exploitative strategies from other people. Because if you don't know how your own mind works, then you won't be able to identify strategies that are being used on your mind. You need to understand how human psychology works. This isn't only going to help you with relationships, in terms of friendships and romantic partnerships. It's also going to help you in the world of business, in terms of business relationships. It's also going to help you understand power dynamics in the world. It's going to help you understand what you're looking at when you look at politicians, when you look at all this shit that comes out in the media. So again, human psychology, extremely important. And then fourthly and finally, educational category number 4. Looking after number 1. Extremely important to look after number 1. To be selfish. To put your interests before other people's. We are told in this modern global world that we need to be an altruist. That we need to be self-sacrificial. That it's a bad thing to be self-interested. We're told all this crap. And all that does is, it puts you in a position of weakness in life. Because if you don't have your own house in order, how the fuck can you help anybody else? If you are whack out of shape, obese, if you are diseased, if you're in physical pain, if you are broke, if you have no money, if you don't understand how your own mind works, and you don't understand man-woman dynamics and power dynamics in the world, how can you help other people? How can you actually be a source of useful advice for other people if you yourself don't have yourself in optimal circumstances? You need to make sure that you are catered for first and foremost before you start dishing out the advice to other people and before you start trying to help other people. You don't want to put the cart before the horse, in other words. It's extremely important that you get yourself right. Because it's only through getting yourself right can you actually be most effective in helping other people. Otherwise, you just become an anchor. You become a fucking hindrance for people. You're of no use or value whatsoever. Okay, so physical health. I hope this is going to let me type. Let's see. So physical health. There are 4 components to physical health. Diet, exercise, sleep, and sunshine or natural daylight. Those are the 4 components. Now, in order to get ourselves up and going in terms of physical health, what can you do? Let's have a look at diet. Remember, this is emergency education, folks. Crash course in how to educate yourself quickly. Now, if you want to improve your diet, what is one thing I would tell you to do if you wanted to improve your diet? Because remember, diet is one of the very important 4 components of your physical health. Folks, if you don't have your physical health, none of the rest of these things matter. We all know this. If your physical health is in jeopardy, it doesn't matter a fuck how much money you have. It doesn't matter how well you know human psychology. It doesn't matter what you have in this life. If you don't have your physical health, life ain't worth living. Because if you're diseased, if you're in pain, and if you're staring down the barrel of the gun and you're about to die, the only thing that's a priority is keeping yourself alive, is getting yourself healthy again. So if you don't have your physical health, you don't have anything. So it's extremely important when we're looking at these 4 components of physical health. We need to make sure that we're looking after our physical health because it takes priority above everything else. Okay, so if you were to take component number 1 of physical health, which is your diet, okay? So diet. What is the one thing that I would tell you? If there was one piece of advice that I could give you for your diet, emergency education, here's what I would say. Add more starch to your diet. That is the first thing I would tell you. If you only had to do, it's the first and only thing I would tell you on a crash course for fucking emergency education. Add more starch to your diet. What is starch? Starch equals potatoes, sweet potatoes, rice, pasta, beans, lentils, oats, noodles, corn, millet, etc., etc. These are all starches, folks. Rice, corn, potatoes, sweet potatoes, pasta, beans, lentils, oats, noodles, millet. I'm just going to put etc. If there was one piece of advice that I could give you, one piece of advice with regards to improving your diet, what I would say to you is add more starch to your diet. Add more potatoes, add more sweet potatoes, add more rice, add more pasta, add more beans, add more lentils, add more oats, add more noodles, add more corn, add more millet, etc. There are other starches as well. These are just some of the more common starches, we could say. Millet perhaps isn't that common here, but it's common sort of out in the Mediterranean and out in Africa. Okay. Add more starch to your diet. That would be the number one thing I would recommend someone do if they want to try and improve their diet. Okay, that's diet. Let's have a look at the next component. Exercise. What is the number one? If I had to pick one thing to say to someone to do in order to improve their exercise, here's what I would say. Walk backwards uphill. And I'll even say walk/run. If there was one exercise that I would recommend someone do, one exercise, because remember, it's a crash course. If you want to improve your current exercise regime, the one thing I would advise you to do is to find an incline, find a slope, find a hill. Go out into nature, go out into your local park. It doesn't even matter if it's not out in nature. Just find a fucking hill somewhere. And instead of walking up the hill conventionally, walking forward, walk or run up that hill backwards. That's it. The act of moving backwards is extremely good for your body. Most people don't do it. Most people just walk in a forward motion. It is really good to start introducing some backward walking or backward running into your exercise routine. It'll do wonders over a long enough time frame for your physical health. Particularly for your knees, for ankles, for all this sort of stuff. So if there was one thing that I was to say to you, one exercise, one kind of physical activity for you to incorporate into your daily routine, it would be to walk or run backwards uphill. That's it. Now, are there other things you could do? Of course. It's a crash course, folks. It's to get you started. Okay, so that's exercise. Find yourself an incline, find yourself a hill, and walk or run backwards. If you can't run, it doesn't matter. That's why I'm saying walk or run. Either one is really good. That will do your lower body, because folks, everybody's always thinking about the upper body. I want to get big muscles, big arms, big chest, big back. Nobody thinks about their lower body. Everybody forgets about the lower body. Everybody wants the fucking Hercules physique. Everybody wants to look like, what do you call that dude out of Hercules? Not Thor. Zeus. Everyone wants to look like Zeus. Great. Okay. I'm not saying you can't do upper body exercise, but the reason why I'm giving you this exercise specifically is because most people neglect their lower body. They don't really do anything for it. So all I'm saying is, find an incline, find an uphill slope, and walk up it backwards. That'll be an excellent starting point. Introduce that into your exercise routine. Okay, third component, sleep. If I had to say one thing for you to do, crash course, to improve your sleep, I would say this. Turn off all electronics and artificial light 1 hour before bed. That's it. You see this whole idea, I need to go to bed at the same time, I need to get up at the same time. No. If you just 1 hour before you go to bed, whatever time you tend to go to bed at, the rough average time, if you tend to go to bed roughly at around 10 o'clock, 1 hour before you go to bed, turn off all your electronics and artificial light. Yes, that means the lights on your ceiling, the fucking light on your phone, the light on your laptop, the light on your TV. Turn it all off. And if you want light, light a fucking candle or put your fire on. Get the artificial light out of your eye an hour before going to bed. That is going to help your sleep enormously. Sleep is an extremely important component of your physical health. And one of the best pieces of advice that I could give to someone is 1 hour before they typically go to bed, turn it all off. And if you want a source of light, find a natural source of light. Find natural fire. There's stuff out there on the internet, folks. You need to be careful what you're buying. But there will be products out there that are going to mimic natural fire. The light from natural fire. Do your own homework. Do your own research. But what I would recommend is turn off the electronics and the artificial light 1 hour before bed. That will do wonders for your sleep. It will allow your eyes to neuroadapt to the decreasing light intensity as the evening and the night comes in. And that will naturally induce sleepiness. It will cause you to start releasing your melatonin. That's what you need. You just want sleepiness to be induced as the light intensity naturally drops. In order to do that, you need to turn off all the artificial light and the electronics. It's an important part of your physical health, folks. That's what I would say there. Finally, sunshine / natural daylight. Okay, simple for this one. Get outside for a minimum of 2 hours every day. Folks, this isn't a big fucking ask. Get your hole outside for 2 hours. That's it. 2 hours is all you need. I think I'm actually off the screen here. Let me readjust this. Hold on. Let's see. Because I think I'm looking at my monitor here. Let me adjust this. Because I don't think anybody can see. I'm just realizing this now. Bear with me for a second. Keep all of this on the screen. Let's see. Is that any better? You should be able to see all of that now. Let me see. I'll see the monitor here whenever it comes up. That should be better. Anyway, I'll keep going. Sunshine and natural daylight. Very simple, folks. let me just add little things in here. Let me put this here. That's one. Exercise, sleep, and sunshine / natural daylight. Okay. So, sunshine, natural daylight, folks. Very simple. 2 hours a day. This isn't a big ask. Fuck me, folks. You've got 24 hours in a day. Get your hole outside for 2 hours a day. It doesn't matter if it's not sunny. The ideal scenario is for there to be sunshine, of course. Get a bit of sunshine on your skin. But you don't need sunshine. If it's a cloudy day, it does not matter. The natural daylight is basically the same thing as sunshine. It's the same thing. Fair enough. You won't get a tan in the same way as the sunshine will tan you, but what you're looking to do is you're looking to get natural light on your skin and in your eyes. This is going to help your sleep. It's extremely important. That's why it's the 4th most important component of your physical health. You need to be getting outside. And I would say for a minimum of 2 hours a day. That's not a big ask, folks. 2 hours a day to get your arse outside. That's it. Okay, so that's physical health. Crash course on physical health. That is what I would say. You've got your 4 components: diet, exercise, sleep, and sunshine. Pause the video. Pause the screen. You can keep on looking at this if you want to. I'm going to move on to the next category. Okay, so that's physical health. If you don't have your physical health, folks, you don't have anything. Okay. Next one, financial health. So again, financial health. If I had to give one piece of advice for your financial health, what would it be? Don't get into debt. That is the best piece of advice that I could give anyone in terms of their financial health. Folks, the fiat financial system, that's the financial system that we use. We use currencies like dollars, pounds, fucking euros, fuck knows what other dog shit currency exists out there. There's a whole bunch of them. They're all fiat currencies. What you need to understand is that the fiat financial system, which you and I use, it is a system built on layers of debt. That's what the system's built on. Why do you think all of these governments are in a shit ton of debt? They're in debt because they continuously do what? They print money. How do you print money? You print money by loaning money. You create money out of thin air through loans. What happens whenever you get a house? You get a mortgage. What is that? It's a loan. What happens whenever you get a car? If you don't buy it outright, what do you need to do? You take out a loan and you pay it back in installments, basically. So you pay it back with interest on each repayment, in other words. The entire system is built on debt. So people are constantly taking out loans from the fiat system, whether it's loans for a house to be bought, loans for a car, loans to start a fucking business, who knows? The system is constantly printing money. And when you print money, what happens to the existing money supply? You inflate it. That is what we call inflation. So whenever you do a whole bunch of money printing, and remember, how do you print money in the fiat financial system? You do it through debt. It's loans, in other words. When you give a loan out to someone, you're creating debt. And that person has to pay that debt back with interest so that the party who has issued the loan makes money. So the entire system is built on debt. My number one piece of advice in this life when it comes to your financial health would be to not get into debt. If you can't buy something outright, you shouldn't be buying it. That's my motto. That's my motto. I don't want to be in fucking debt, folks. Debt is a surefire way for me to get myself into a position of weakness. All it takes is a fucking extraordinary event in the world, like a pandemic, a financial crisis, an energy crisis, or a fucking war. Any of this sound familiar, folks? What happened in 2020? Pandemic. What happened in 2023 or 2022? War. Ukraine and Russia. What happened this year? US, Israel, Iran, war. What's going to be the consequences of this? Financial crisis. Energy crisis. Folks, if you are already in a shit ton of debt, you are going to be in a position of weakness in life. Because once the fireworks start to kick off in the world, whether it's a financial crisis, a pandemic, or a war, you now, because you're already up to your eyeballs in debt, what's going to happen? What happens when there are significant events in the world, like pandemics, wars, and fucking financial crises? What does the government do? What do the banks do whenever these events happen? They print more money. In other words, they give out more loans, which leads to more what? Debt. This is why I say the entire system is built on debt. So whenever you have significant events happening, the government starts to send out a whole bunch more loans to people, starts to bail people out. In other words, they start to print more money. And when you print more money, what do you do to the currency? Whether it's the euro, whether it's the pound, whether it's the dollar, it doesn't matter. When you print more money, you debase the currency, which means your currency loses its purchasing power. And if your wage doesn't keep pace with inflation, you're fucked. And please remind me, folks, is your wage keeping pace with inflation? That's right, I thought so. It isn't. The last thing you need to be doing, folks, is getting into debt. Whether that's debt at Christmas because you can't fucking control yourself with a credit card, or getting into debt buying a house, buying a fucking car, getting a whole shit ton of loans out to start a fucking business. Folks, if you can't buy something outright, you shouldn't be buying it. Simple. That's the motto that I use. If I can't buy it outright, I don't have it. And you know why? I don't want to be in debt. Because when I'm in debt, I'm in a relative position of weakness compared to where I would be if I was not in debt. That's the number one piece of advice that I would give. Don't get into debt. If you can't buy it outright, you shouldn't be buying it. Okay, that's financial health. Crash course. Next one, human psychology. Now, what would I say about this? Again, it's very important that you understand your own mind. Extremely important. If you don't understand your own mind, that means you can be manipulated. If you don't understand the inner workings of your own psychology, but other people do understand the inner workings, the other people can use their knowledge of the mind to manipulate yours. So it's very important for you to understand how your own mind works. If I had to give you one piece of advice with regards to human psychology and human behavior, I would say this. Listen to people's words and observe their actions. Hold on, I'll have to bring this off. Hold on a second. I don't want to do that same thing I did before. Whoa, what has happened here? Let's see. Now, there we go. Listen to people's words and observe their actions. If their words and actions contradict one another. Let me see if I can move this up a little. If their words and actions contradict one another, don't trust them. There is the number one piece of advice that I could give you with regards to human psychology. Listen, if you're trying to get a read on someone, folks, because at the end of the day, we are a social creature. We have to interact with other humans. One of the big questions that we need to ask ourselves is, can I trust this person? It doesn't matter whether it's a romantic relationship, a friendship, or a business relationship, or even a family relationship, a familial relationship. If it's an inevitability, folks, that you're going to meet people in this life, one of the key things that you need to develop, one of the key skills you need to develop is to figure out if that person is worth your time and attention, and if you can trust them. How do you do this? If I had to give you one piece of advice when it comes to human psychology, it would be this. Listen to people's words and observe their actions. If their words and actions contradict one another, don't trust them. We talk about this on the show all the time. Listen to their words, observe their actions. If their words and actions are not in agreement, in other words, if they are saying one thing and doing another thing, don't trust them. I'm not saying they are bad people, but what I am saying is don't trust them. Don't throw your lot in with them, because they are giving you evidence that they have an agenda that they are trying to conceal from you. And if they are concealing an agenda from you, that probability-wise means that they are probably trying to manipulate and exploit you in some way. Otherwise, they wouldn't conceal it from you. So, words and actions. Whenever someone says something to you, folks, you want to figure out, do these words have meaning? Are they a man or woman of their word? How do we know if someone is a man or woman of their word? You need to watch and observe their actions. And if you see someone's words are at odds with their actions, take note. That person is not to be trusted. Whether that's a romance, a friendship, a business relationship, or a fucking family member. Don't give your family members a Bible. Family members can be some of the most manipulative people on the planet because they use this crap of, oh, well, we're related through genes. Blood is thicker than water. Fucking crap. Listen to their words, observe their actions, and cast your judgment then. If you are seeing a contradiction between what they say and what they do, don't trust them. You need more information. Don't throw your lot in with them. That would be my number one piece of advice, human psychology-wise. Okay. Now, last thing. Looking after number one. As I said on Friday's show, one of my favorite topics of all. Being selfish, folks. What would I say here? If I had to give you one piece of advice on this crash course of emergency education, here's what I would say. To restore balance, brackets, help other people, you must first restore balance to yourself. Okay. That is the best thing that I could say to you to convince you, or to at least help you realize the importance of looking after number one and being selfish. To restore balance, in other words, to help other people, to restore balance, because that's what you're doing. When you're helping someone in this life, folks, what are you really trying to do? If someone is in trouble in life, they are out of balance. Their life is out of balance in some way. So if someone needs your help, what they are basically saying to you is, Mr. Bandido, my life is out of balance. Can you help me restore balance to this aspect of my life? Okay, so to restore balance or help other people, you must first restore balance to yourself. If you are turbulent, if your life is turbulent, if you haven't got your health in order, if you haven't got your finances in order, and if you don't really understand the nature of human personality and human behavior, you aren't balanced. Your life is not in balance. How the fuck can you help someone else restore balance to their life if your life in the here and now is not in balance? How can you do that? You can't do it very effectively. So if your goal in this life, folks, is to be as valuable, useful, and helpful to other people, you must put the horse before the cart. You need to put the horse, in front of the cart. Don't put the cart before the horse. You need to make sure you are the horse. In order for you to help the people behind you in the cart, you need to be out in front, and you need to have the strength and the knowledge and the sense of direction to be able to pull that cart to wherever they need to go. If you are a fat, obese horse who is sick and who doesn't know how to take care of itself, how are you going to help the people in the cart? You can't. And so we have this phrase in life, don't put the cart before the horse, basically. You don't want to be putting the cart out in front. That's no use. And if you are the horse that's going to be pulling the cart, you as the horse, You need to be in an optimal state to be able to do that effectively. So there's one thing, don't put the cart before the horse, but the horse itself needs to be in shape. It needs to be in circumstances where it has restored balance to its own life. If your objective, folks, is to truly help people, then you will be selfish. You will look after number one, because you will understand that by having number one catered for, you are now in a position to effectively help people. Who wants help from a retard? Like, let's be honest, folks. If you're up shit creek without a paddle, do you want a retard coming to help you? No! You want a competent person. You want someone who has their own house in order, who is competent, who's in optimal circumstances. They are more likely, probability-wise, to help you, or to be able to help you. You need to look at it similarly. To restore balance or help other people, you must first restore balance to yourself. Don't put the cart before the horse. And whenever you get the cart and the horse in the right order, you as the horse, you need to make sure that you're capable to actually help the people who are in the cart behind you. Okay, so there's your crash course, folks. Looking after number one. To restore balance to other people, you must first restore balance to yourself. It is literally a contradiction. It is counterproductive, sorry. If you haven't put yourself first and you haven't got your own ducks in a row, you can't effectively help other people. You're putting the cart before the horse, in other words. Okay, let's get our main screen back up, because that is us. That is your emergency education, folks. I need to bounce. It's 5 to 12. I should have been finished 20 minutes ago. So look, folks, if you enjoyed the show, do we have a live chat here? Let's see. We have a couple of live chats. Let me get a look at these. I'll rattle through these quickly. Let's have a look. Before we wrap it up here, we've got Quiz 22. Quiz 22 says the following. A great recovery stream from the Bandido. After the apple juices induced deletion. As Alfred says, why do we fall, sir? Very appropriate indeed. Why do we fall? Let's complete quizzes freeze so that we can learn to pick ourselves back up. Of course, that's what Alfred says in Batman Begins. Quality stuff. We gotta love a bit of quizzed, folks. He's up to speed on his Dark Knight lore, we could say. So absolutely, we had to recover, folks. When you lose, don't lose the lesson. That's the key thing. Who else do we have? We've got old Deje. I'm going to keep pronouncing it this way. D-E-J-E. Deje is in the live chat. Let's see what they have to say. They say the following. Thanks for the tips, bro. Too bad about episode 77. Such is life. This is the thing. Look, in a way, actually, perhaps it works out slightly better. The show was extremely long. And in a way, I could actually make the argument that this show is more useful. Because sometimes when the Bandido gets up and going, he can ramble a bit. Bit of the old rambling. This one's more to the point. It cuts closer to the grain. Because sometimes when you give people a shit ton of information, it can go over their head. It can be too intimidating. You know, it can feel like the expectations have been set too high. Information overload. This one's more to the point. It's an emergency education broadcast. So look, we appreciate our live chatters. Quiz 22, Deje, we appreciate you folks for getting in to the live chat. We appreciate the feedback on the show, as always. So look, folks, that is a wrap from me. Let me know down in the comments, if you're watching the live show replay, let me know your thoughts on everything that we've talked about. We're almost going for 2 hours. The Bandido, he needs the duct tape to keep that mouth of his closed after a certain point. When he gets up and going, he just doesn't know when to stop. But let me know down in the comments if you're watching the live show replay. Agree, disagree, leave your thoughts down there. Again, folks, hit the thumbs up if you liked what you heard. And then finally, folks, subscribe here on Bandido Talks on YouTube. Head over to Rumble, use the scrolling black banner below. You'll be able to find the address to head over to Rumble. Listen to some of our live shows over there. We've got completely different live shows over on Rumble. Head over there, Bandido Talks on Rumble. Subscribe here on YouTube, Bandido Talks. We're also active over on X. head over there. You can follow on X. We can notify you when we've got any live shows up and coming. Folks, again, scrolling red banner up above. If you want to personally get in contact with the Bandido about any of this stuff, this is a crash course in education. If you want to get in contact personally with the Bandido, use that email address. Where is it? Over here. Matteo@inspirit.uk. That's how you can get in contact directly with the Bandido. I'll leave all that with you, folks. That is everything from me. It's time to get on with this Tuesday afternoon. We're almost out of the morning. And with all of that said, folks, it is over and out this afternoon from the Bandido.